Below is exactly 1,000 words. London, in the winter of 1842, seemed carved from frost and breath, a city of silver-lit streets, curtained windows, and the restless clatter of carriage wheels that echoed against ancient stone. On the night of the St. James's Palace Winter Ball, the fog thinned just long enough for the palace chandeliers to spill their light across the courtyard, creating the illusion that the entire building floated above the world like a lantern suspended by unseen hands. Into this world stepped Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, a young woman whose courage was far sturdier than the mended silk of her gown. She paused at the palace entrance, steadying her breath while her aunt, Lady Margaret, adjusted a fraying ribbon at her shoulder. Eleanor knew she was not what London expected of a baron's daughter, and certainly not what its aristocracy welcomed. She carried the air of the English countryside, unpolished yet dignified, as though the winds of her rural home still clung to her posture. Inside, the ballroom swelled with color and heat. Wax gleamed on polished floors, golden sconces caught the sheen of every jewel, and guests drifted past like moving constellations. Eleanor followed her aunt across the room, each step echoing louder in her ears than the orchestra's violins. She wished desperately not to draw attention, yet her arrival stirred quiet ripples of curiosity. Mothers whispered behind their fans. Sons measured her with brief, assessing glances. She had been warned that London society possessed a taste for cruelty when faced with anything unfamiliar, and she felt its appetite sharpening around her already. Still, Eleanor maintained her composure. Her upbringing had not given her wealth, but it had given her an education, one she guarded closely, as though it were the last inheritance her father had left. Her eyes, bright and quietly observant, swept over the room, lingering on the glittering assembly of statesmen gathered near the marble hearth. Among them stood the man whose reputation reached even the farthest corners of England, Arthur Pembroke, the Duke of Winthorpe. Tall, reserved, carved with a kind of stillness that commanded a room before he ever spoke. His widowhood, whispered about in drawing-rooms and newspapers, had not softened him. Rather, it had rendered him impenetrable, a man governed entirely by propriety and the brittle armor of unshakable discipline. Eleanor did not intend to speak to him. She only meant to listen from a respectful distance when a conversation about railway expansions drifted toward her. One gentleman expressed admiration for a proposed line that would cut directly through several rural villages. Eleanor, startled by the casual disregard for the people who lived there, spoke without considering the danger of contradicting powerful men. She explained, with polite resolve, that such progress should not erase the lives of those who tended the land. A murmur rippled through the surrounding circle at the impropriety of her intrusion, but Arthur Pembroke stepped forward, drawn by the disturbance. "Progress," he said coolly, "is not tempered by the sentiments of the countryside, however earnestly expressed." Eleanor turned to him. "And yet progress without regard for consequence is rarely progress at all." Her voice was soft, but the conviction within it surprised him. For a moment, something unreadable flickered across his face. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the frost he was known for. "Lady," he said, "you tread boldly into matters beyond your station." His words stung, yet she did not look away. "My station does not determine the worth of my thoughts, Your Grace." Her courage startled the surrounding guests. Even the violins seemed to falter. Arthur studied her, a slow tightening in his jaw suggesting she had struck a chord he did not wish exposed. He might have walked away had pride not intervened. Instead, he delivered the sentence that would wound her far deeper than he realized. "You are not fit to be a wife." The ballroom froze around them. Gasps fluttered like startled birds. A lady pressed her gloved hand to her chest. Eleanor felt the heat drain from her face, felt her aunt stiffen behind her, felt the crushing weight of humiliation settle upon her shoulders with almost physical force. She wanted to retreat, yet she stood rooted, unwilling to bow beneath his judgment. Something in her stillness, stricken but unbroken, unsettled the Duke more than any argument she could have made. For reasons he could not articulate, Arthur stepped closer. His rigid posture faltered, his gaze softened, and in a gesture that contradicted every cold syllable he had just spoken, he reached for her hand. The hall watched with unblinking fascination as he bowed, lowered his lips to her knuckles, and kissed her hand with unmistakable deliberation. It was a gesture of respect, apology, and something far more dangerous, acknowledgement. The scandal ignited at once. Whispers exploded across the ballroom like sparks skittering over oil. Eleanor felt the brush of his breath, the lingering warmth of his touch, and the bewildering contradiction of the moment left her breathless. She pulled her hand back gently, unsure if she should feel grateful, insulted, or suddenly seen. Arthur straightened with impeccable poise, but his mask had cracked. An expression of regret slipped through before he could hide it. The orchestra resumed uncertainly, guests drifted into new clusters of gossip, but the air remained charged, heavy with unspoken questions. Eleanor managed a single step backward, then another. Her legs trembled beneath her gown. Shame flushed beneath her skin, but beneath that shame pulsed something alarming, an ember of curiosity she could not extinguish. She had arrived expecting indifference from London, not a moment that would place her at the center of its relentless scrutiny. As she retreated toward her aunt, she resisted the urge to look back at him, yet the pull was undeniable. She sensed he felt it too. Arthur stood where she had left him, shoulders taut, gaze fixed on the crowd rather than the woman he had just publicly contradicted and honored in the same breath. He had not meant to speak so harshly, nor had he meant to touch her. Something about her, her resolve, her unvarnished honesty, had pierced the shell he had cultivated since his wife's death. He despised such vulnerability, yet he could not deny it. Eleanor reached the edge of the ballroom, heart pounding. The night had begun not with dancing or delight, but with a wound that glimmered strangely, as though it carried the faintest promise of something unforeseen. And somewhere across the room, she knew the Duke felt it too. The scandal of the winter ball did not fade with the dying embers of the orchestra's final notes. By morning, all of London had feasted upon it. Every drawing-room simmered with speculation, every newspaper hinted at impropriety, and every young lady imagined what it might mean for a duke to first condemn a woman in public, and then kiss her hand as though granting her a private absolution. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe awoke to this storm with a restless heaviness in her chest. Her aunt's townhouse in Mayfair, usually a haven of measured calm, hummed with the scratch of quills writing invitations, inquiries, and thinly veiled attempts to pry gossip from her aunt's loyal servants. Eleanor stood at the window, watching carriages roll past, feeling her name carried on their wheels like a rumor set loose upon the wind. Her aunt approached with a soft sigh. "You should eat, my dear. A fainting heroine is only charming in novels." Eleanor managed a smile. "I imagine the papers have painted me as rather dramatic already." "Not dramatic," Lady Margaret replied carefully. "Unusual. And London does not tolerate unusual unless it is wrapped in diamonds." She rested a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "But remember, dignity is armor." Eleanor nodded, though she did not feel armored. She felt exposed, as though her honesty had been a misstep that London would not forgive. Yet beneath her anxiety flickered a troubling, persistent awareness of Arthur Pembroke. His cold words had wounded her, but the warmth of his unexpected gesture had unsettled her far more. That contradiction lived inside her now like a question without an answer. Across the city, the Duke of Winthorpe sat alone in his study, staring at correspondence he had not touched. The fire crackled steadily, but nothing could dispel the sense of disquiet that trailed him from the palace. His household had learned not to inquire about matters that clouded his expression, but even the silence around him felt accusatory. He replayed the scene more times than pride allowed him to admit. The moment he spoke too sharply, the moment she met his gaze without shrinking, the moment he bent to kiss her hand with a gentleness he had not known he still possessed. He despised impulsive behavior, especially in himself. Yet something about her presence had unraveled him. Her defiance had not been rebellious. It had been sincere. Her voice had trembled slightly, not with fear, but with conviction. And her eyes, clear, steady, held an honesty he had not encountered in years. It disturbed him that he remembered their color. By midday, the Duke received a letter sealed in soft violet wax. Lady Margaret requested Eleanor's presence at an afternoon gathering hosted by a countess renowned for her influence. Arthur felt a tightening in his chest as he read the guest list. His name was included, naturally, and so were the names of every matron adept at sniffing out scandal. He knew precisely what would happen. Eleanor would be scrutinized, judged, perhaps cornered. She would be treated as an object of amusement, or worse, of pity. The thought unsettled him more than he wished to acknowledge. At the Countess's gathering, the drawing-room glowed with the amber light of a late winter afternoon. Eleanor entered with a calm expression she did not entirely feel. The room shifted subtly at her arrival. Conversation slowed, fans fluttered theatrically, and eyes sharpened with barely concealed curiosity. She moved with quiet dignity, choosing a seat near a lace-draped window. Her aunt lingered nearby, vigilant. A group of young ladies drifted toward Eleanor, their smiles sweet but their words edged with barbs. "Lady Eleanor," one said with false warmth, "you must tell us how you managed to so thoroughly capture the Duke's attention. It is quite the achievement to rouse emotion from a man famously carved from granite." Eleanor met their gazes without flinching. "I did not capture anything," she answered. "I simply spoke my mind." "And he simply kissed your hand," another tittered. "How admirably convenient." Before Eleanor could respond, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Arthur Pembroke had entered. His presence moved through the gathering like a cold current through warm water. The ladies straightened, their laughter fading instantly. Eleanor felt her breath hitch, though she kept her composure. Arthur approached the group with precise, measured steps. "Ladies," he greeted politely, then turned his attention to Eleanor. "Lady Ashcombe, may I speak with you?" The request, delivered with impeccable courtesy, caused a ripple of startled whispers. Eleanor rose slowly, her heart thundering beneath her stays. She followed him to a quieter corner near the piano, where the murmurs of the room dulled into background haze. "I owe you an apology," Arthur said, his voice low. "My words last night were harsh and unworthy." Eleanor studied him, noting the tension at the corner of his mouth, the restraint in his posture. "You spoke honestly, Your Grace," she replied softly. "And honesty need not be apologized for. It does when it wounds without cause." She was taken aback by the sincerity threading through his tone. "I am not accustomed to your society's ways," she admitted. "Perhaps I spoke too boldly." "I did not object to your boldness," he said, surprising them both. "I objected to feeling caught off guard." Eleanor felt her breath falter. "I meant no such intention." "I know." His gaze held hers, steady and unexpectedly open. "It is precisely why I regret my words." A silence stretched between them, not strained, but delicate, as though something fragile hovered between them and neither dared touch it. Before Eleanor could speak, a maid approached with a small envelope. "For you, my lady." Eleanor accepted it, unaware of the eyes watching her. The envelope bore no name, only a pressed winter rose sealed beneath wax. She opened it carefully. Inside lay a single handwritten note. "Truth is a rare courage. Do not silence it." Her breath caught. She did not need a signature to know who had written it. Arthur watched her reaction with a flicker of unease, though his face remained composed. "A token," he said quietly, "to correct last night's injustice." Eleanor folded the note gently, as though it were something precious. "Your Grace, this is far kinder than I deserve." His voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "You deserve far more kindness than you have received." The words struck her deeply. Across the room, the Countess observed them with sharp interest, and a dangerous whisper began to bloom among the guests. Eleanor felt the weight of those whispers, but found herself standing straighter. Arthur, sensing the shift around them, offered his arm. "Walk with me," he said. "If London insists upon watching, let us give them something worth interpreting." Eleanor hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. The drawing-room fell into a hush, and together they crossed it, not as a scandal, but as two people beginning something neither yet understood. The carriage ride from the Countess's gathering unfolded in a strange, charged silence. Eleanor sat across from her aunt, hands folded tightly in her lap, the note from the Duke resting against her palm like a secret burning through layers of silk. Lady Margaret watched her with quiet concern, but asked no questions. She understood all too well that there were moments in a young woman's life that required private reckoning rather than remedy. Eleanor gazed out at the gaslit streets of London, watching snowflakes drift lazily through the glow, each one dissolving upon the carriage window. She felt herself dissolving too, into uncertainty, into hope she feared to entertain, into the bewildering memory of the Duke's softened voice and the steadiness in his eyes. Across town, Arthur Pembroke rode alone through the evening fog. He had declined his driver, choosing instead to walk the final streets toward his residence. The night was cold, bracing, welcome. He felt uncomfortably aware of himself, of decisions made swiftly, of words spoken with a vulnerability he usually reserved only for his daughter's memory. He had no desire to be the subject of idle gossip, nor did he seek admiration or pity. Yet the image of Eleanor's wounded dignity had stayed with him, and the compulsion to mend the damage had overridden his usual restraint. He questioned now whether he had gone too far in that direction as well. That night, Eleanor sat in her aunt's small study near the fire, reading the Duke's note again. Each curve of ink seemed deliberate, thoughtful, restrained. She wondered what manner of man would rebuke her so sharply one night and defend her so graciously the next. Her emotions tangled like ivy, uncertainty twining with quiet admiration, curiosity threading through caution. She pressed the note to her chest and whispered to the empty room, "What are you to me, Your Grace? And what am I becoming to you?" The following afternoon brought another invitation, this time from the Duchess of Ravenscroft, a formidable matron whose approval could raise or ruin any young woman's reputation. Lady Margaret read the card aloud, her expression unreadable. "It seems your presence is requested at a small tea tomorrow," she said. "And the Duke of Winthorpe will also be in attendance." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Is this intentional?" "Everything in London society is intentional," her aunt replied gently. "But it need not frighten you. You held your ground yesterday with remarkable grace. I felt anything but graceful. Grace does not depend upon your feelings. It depends upon your choices." Eleanor took a slow breath. "Then I shall choose to face whatever tomorrow brings." The tea at Ravenscroft House was intimate, but no less intimidating for its small size. Eleanor arrived in a gown of pale blue taffeta, chosen by her aunt for its soft dignity rather than ostentation. She moved through the foyer with controlled steps, though her heart fluttered wildly beneath the fabric. When she entered the parlor, Arthur was already there, speaking with the Duchess. He turned at the sound of her arrival, and for a fleeting moment, his expression softened into something neither polite nor distant, something quietly relieved. He crossed the room with measured composure. "Lady Ashcombe," he greeted, bowing slightly. "You honor us by accepting the invitation." Eleanor returned the courtesy. "I am but a guest, Your Grace. The honor lies with our hostess." The Duchess observed the exchange with a raised brow. "Well," she declared, "it seems last night's excitement has not diminished civility between the two of you. London will be disappointed." Arthur's jaw tightened. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. The Duchess chuckled and waved them to their seats. Throughout the tea, Eleanor found herself drawn into conversation with Arthur more naturally than she expected. He spoke with a candor she had not anticipated, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the title. Sometimes his words carried the weight of loss, sometimes they hinted at a dry, restrained humor that startled a smile from her. Eleanor discovered her own composure complicated by warmth, and she saw subtle flickers of admiration in his eyes whenever she spoke with conviction. At one point, when the other guests turned their attention to a lively debate about foreign trade, Arthur leaned toward her slightly, lowering his voice. "You carry yourself today with remarkable assurance." She met his gaze, steady but unsure of her voice. "Only because you encouraged it." "You required no encouragement," he replied softly. "You were steadfast from the moment I first heard you speak." His words affected her deeply, more than she wished to show. She turned slightly, pretending to admire a porcelain vase on the mantel. Arthur noticed but did not press her further. When the gathering concluded, Eleanor lingered by the window as guests departed. Arthur approached her once more. "I hope my presence today did not cause you discomfort." "It did not," she replied honestly. "In truth, it steadied me." Arthur looked down at her, his expression shifting with unspoken thought. "Lady Eleanor," he said quietly, "I find myself wishing to speak with you without the eyes of London upon us. Would you grant me such a conversation?" Her breath stilled, though she kept her voice composed. "If my aunt approves it, then yes." He bowed his head. Then I shall request her permission at once. Later, as the carriages rolled away and Eleanor and her aunt stepped outside, Arthur approached them with a respectful solemnity. He formally asked Lady Margaret for the opportunity to call upon Eleanor the next day, not as a suitor, but as a man seeking honest discourse unburdened by social theatre. Her aunt, though clearly surprised, agreed. As Eleanor climbed into the carriage, Arthur stepped back but did not look away. Their eyes met across the frosted air, his gaze filled with earnest restraint, hers bright with hesitant hope. The connection, tenuous yet undeniable, tightened between them like a thread drawn taut. The carriage door closed, but the sensation lingered, humming through Eleanor's pulse. As they drove away, her aunt reached for her hand. "My dear," she said, her voice both cautious and warm, "whatever tomorrow brings, remember who you are." Eleanor nodded, gazing out into the gathering twilight. She felt London shifting around her, felt her own heart shifting too. The path ahead was fraught with expectation and peril, but something deep within her whispered that she was no longer merely enduring her entry into society. She was stepping toward something far more significant. And tomorrow, when the Duke of Winthorpe called, she would discover whether that whispered promise held truth or heartbreak.